Jerome, Arizona is known as one of the most haunted places in the U.S. In fact, another name is the most wicked of all the cities. So how did it get to be known for that? That's what we'll be talking about today. The history of Jerome, Arizona.
Before Jerome became a full-on paranormal tourist attraction for people to visit nowadays, it was very successful at being a copper mining town. So successful, in fact, that in its prime it had a population of about 15,000 people. Jerome had such an abundant amount of copper coming out of the mines that every person in the world could receive 13 pounds of copper from Jerome alone. Sadly, the good times didn't last long. Once the mines closed down, a lot of people left. Now, in 1876, the mining claims for the location were purchased by two people, Agnes McKinnon and Morris A. Ruffner. Now, they only had the property for 4 years until they got bought out by a couple other people, and those people were Frederick A. Triddle, and he was the governor of the Arizona Territory at the time, and Frederick F. Thomas. He was a mining engineer, and he was coming up to Arizona from San Francisco, and he bought these claims from those two former gentlemen. The reason why they were able to purchase this was with the backing of some other wealthier names from New York. Now, one of them was James A. MacDonald and Eugene Jerome. And Eugene Jerome, the name sounds familiar because the town is called Jerome. They gave the backings for this foundation. Actually, Eugene Jerome also became the secretary of the company that they created when they started going to start up mining for the town in Jerome. Now, the company was called United Verde Copper Company because Jerome sat on a valley that was called the Verde Valley, which is Green Valley in Spanish. Once they started developing the land of Jerome for mining, they made a small smelter, which is basically a smelter is something that can be used to separate the ore, which is going to be whatever metal or precious metals. So you typically especially with copper, there's going to be chunks of rock and debris clumped in with the actual precious metal, and the smelter is designed to heat it up to extreme heat to separate the precious metal from the stuff that's not really needed or that was valuable. Some deposits were as pure as 45%, whereas in typical copper concentrations were less than even 1%. So this was very, very valuable deposits of copper that they were getting out of just this little town. Now, after that smelter was made and a certain number of wagon roads were constructed in the beginnings of the town of Jerome, 4 years later, William A. Clark, a man who had major success in the state of Montana, he came down, heard about a little bit of the struggle that the company was having in the beginnings of Jerome. After that, copper percentage fell about 50%, the price from its original, so it plummeted pretty hard. After hearing that, came by, got the thoughts to pick up the company, which he did, bought it out, enlarged some of the smaller aspects of it. He made a bigger, better smelter, and just overall kind of lifted up the company from the ruins that it was kind of turning out to be. When people arrived there, it was a tiny little tent city, and about 75% to 78% based off of what I was researching was people there to mine. So it was mostly male workers. And the others are prostitutes that came by to offer their services to the miners, because they heard, because word travels fast along, whenever there's gold or any precious metals, people come. Even though those people, the prostitutes, weren't even there for mining the gold, they were there for the profits that the miners had for that money, that work. Jerome later down, I'll mention this a few other times, it did get this notoriety that it was a very wicked city and that you don't want to bring your children there because they had a red light district, they had a lot of brothels. Now, the pastimes that were in Jerome were prostitution, gambling, drinking. That's where it got that notoriety of that is probably not a good place to hang around and do kind of stuff like that, because if you're not working in the mines, you're either doing one of those other things, because there's just not that much stuff to do when it was a developing city. Now, the actual prostitution aspect of it in the beginning, because it was a tent city, they actually gave the term and name of the prostitutes blanket whores, because they did their business meetings on blankets, because it was, again, not a fully developed city. So that's why they got that term blanket whores. Along the topic of prostitution and the side habits of these people in the town of Jerome, there was a person who arrived there in 1896 by the name of Jenny Bouders. She's actually a immigrant from Belgium, Brussels, Belgium to be exact, and she arrived there with her 14-year-old son named John. It was during this time that she took complete advantage of the prostitution game, and she knew to a T how to manage this sort of stuff. Now, there was many brothels, like I previously explained, in this town, and this town is not big. Nowadays, at least, it's been rebuilt 3-4 times just because of how many fires took place, but I could pretty much walk around it in under an hour, the whole deal, not including the mines, but just kind of all the towns, the houses, those areas of the actual city. And people assume, based off of everything I learned, that she had former experience to be a owner of a brothel, or know like the workings of how to get one very successfully going. Now, she did something very different based off of, again, with her experience that she had. This kind of included why people thought she had prior experience to opening up this brothel. Now, the brothel building was called Jenny's Place, just named after Jenny, and instead of charging rent like other brothels were doing in the town, she took 50% of what the prostitutes were making and just gave them free housing, protection, a place to just kind of hang out and stay and relax and live. Now, there were many buildings that did offer prostitution, but Jenny had this way with her customers that she'd sit down, offer them a drink, she'd talk about their day, play cards with them, gamble, while the girls are getting ready for the customer. So she had a very good connection with these miners that came in, and they paid about half of their wage on these ladies. So she was racking in a lot of money. And these miners at the time were making somewhere from $2 to $4, depending on the severity and the danger of the job that they were doing. Is obviously you're gonna get paid more for how dangerous it is. But yeah, it was crazy. They were paying half of their money just on prostitution alone. And take in mind that there's 75 to 78% of the population are men. They're going to be using a lot of prostitution. It just blows my mind. Anyway, now Jenny's Place did burn down 3 times in a very short amount of time. I mean, the whole town of Jerome was very subject to fires. Most of their houses in the early stages were tents, very close together, pretty much right next to the mines, and there was always oil lit lanterns. And then as soon as they did develop, they were all made out of, the houses were all, and the buildings were all made out of wooden and clay. Pretty much everything was made to be kindling in this town. That's why it burned down so many times. Jenny's Place burned down 3 times from the time span of 1897 to 1900. Now that could be taken, I don't know exactly the dates, but that's within 3 years that it burned down 3 times. And it took the town 4 times getting burned that they decided to take initiative and be like, okay, we want to not have the town burned down anymore. We want to be able to live peacefully without having this constant hazard, because people were dying from the fires, and the fires were just running rampant every time it did start up. So they decided to make brick houses instead of wooden ones, and thus pretty much put a halt to the fires. So they actually wised up and did that, which was really good. Now Jenny, she would eventually leave Jerome. In 1903, she heard rumors that a northwest town in in Arizona called Gold Road had sightings of gold and lots of prosperous metals to be had there. So a lot of people, she just packed up her business, went up there. Pretty soon after Jenny Bowders made that trek to Gold Road, Arizona, she would set up shop with her whole prostitution business, trying to get that started up again. Didn't have as much success as it did in Jerome, but soon after she did get murdered by a local drug addict. Yeah, and that's the end of her story that I have for her. Yeah, very sad, tragic death for her. But her building still stands to this day in Jerome, and it actually went through a very extensive restoration process so it wouldn't crumble to the ground, because it was in pretty rough shape when it was found. But it was secured by Nellie Bly and Mary Wills and Sally Dreyer. Sally Dreyer may sound familiar to you guys, maybe not, but she's actually the voice of Lucy Van Pelt from the Peanuts television show. And nowadays, it is a kaleidoscope store. Now, as for Jerome, it is famous for its mines, its copper, its revenue that it brought out. 1876 is when the proper mining started in Jerome, and it shut down in 1918 because there was so many fires underground. The miners were not going to go down there. Underground, it was massive. It was huge. They had 88 miles of tunnels underneath the town just for mining, and some of that was just purely infested with fire, and that just made everything underground so hot at the time. That's why they shut down in 1918. But before that, it was 88 miles of just underground. I cannot even fathom that. That is insane. I run 3 miles and I'm dead, let alone hiking 88 miles around. Imagine if you got lost in there. That's insane to me. That blows my mind when I was researching that. One of the mines, Little Daisy Mine, produced $10 million of copper, silver, and gold just out of that mine. The amount of wealth that came out of Jerome was baffling. Now, the company developed how the miners are getting in and out of these mines were very, very advanced for their time. I want to focus primarily on how the miners were getting underground and what got into this stretch of 88 miles of just pure dark abyss. They were brought down with one of the most advanced contraptions at the time was a Audrey shaft. That was the name of the shaft. A miner shaft is what's going to be used. You load up miners in this little container. Pretty much it acts as an elevator that takes you from surface level all the way down however deep it needed to go. And in the Audrey shaft case, it was 1900 feet down. That is 650 feet higher or deeper than the Empire State Building, which is insane. But this is all underground. Now, this shaft was made operational on 1915 to 1938. It brought about 4 million tons of ore were extracted from the mine that it was directly above. The Audrey shaft is most really well known for the fact of how much ore came out of it at the time. Now, 397,000 tons of copper came out of this part of the mine, and there was 221 tons of silver found that was also relocated with the shaft, and 5.5 tons of gold. So for the long-term success of Jerome and hauling all this ore out, it was very important that the Audrey shaft was functional and it did its job correctly, which it did. But with that, let me get on to the last section here. So what I really want to talk about is a hotel, and it's by the name of Hotel Connor. So it's made by a man named David Connor. It was made in 1898, and it was a very well received hotel. It was very loved by the people. This burned down 2 times and was rebuilt, and it is actually a hotel that I personally, with my wife, we spent the night in a weekend up there. It was really cool. It was really awesome. The reason why I wanted to focus on the Hotel Connor is because that, again, I stayed there for a couple nights, and I heard when we were booking this place that it was haunted. There are a couple other places that are haunted, supposedly seeing paranormal activity, but I never have had anything like paranormal happen to me in my life. But I've always wanted, if that sounds kind of weird, but I've always kind of like wanted something to happen just to kind of see what it would be like. So After our first day, we go around, we do a little tour, eat some food, we come back, and you have to go, the way that it's laid out is you have to go up a flight of stairs, turn right, go up another flight, and then turn right, and then go up to, it's kind of like a grand opening staircase up to these rooms that are up on the second floor. Now, because the building is so old, there's every step you take on the stairs or around anywhere is going to be squeaking sounds, creaking from the wood, just the floor, just anything. The building's old. It makes noises, as any building does. But our room we stayed in room 3, and that was the first room you saw. So you walked up from the opening staircase, you got up there, and you saw number 3. That was the first one. You go on the left, there's 1 and 2, and the rest of the rooms you were going on the right. We were walking up, and as soon as we walked up the stairs, obviously we could see our room, which was room number 3, and I was making light of the situation. I always crack jokes. I like to be a goofball with my wife, and I was saying to her, hey, what if, what are the odds that a little bit of Ghost, a little Casper action's gonna come our way, right? And my wife was tired, and she gets frightened pretty easily, especially if I really try to scare her. And the whole car ride up to Jerome, I was kind of doing this kind of stuff like, oh, we're gonna see a ghost, okay, we're gonna be, whoa, it's gonna, woo. And we get to the door, and I pull the key out of my pocket and put it in the slot in the keyhole. As I am turning the key, I'm not making this up, I am 100% serious, I heard a little boy laughing in the room, in room number 3. And I turned with my hand still on the key. I looked at my wife and I was like, did you hear that? Like, I'm not making this up in my mind, right? I know I've been making a lot of jokes. I'm dead serious. I don't know. She basically confirmed with her facial expression, body language, that she heard it and was a little bit frightened by it. So what I did, I opened up the door fully, cautiously, turned the light on, and I looked everywhere in this room. There was nothing. I thought there was going to be like a little radio, stereo, something connected to Bluetooth with someone playing, a little boy laughing. Didn't find anything. Looked outside my windows, nothing under the beds, and our neighbors, there was no children next to us at all. That's what creeped me out the most, was that there was no children next to us. That's my reasoning of why I wanted to specifically share the Hotel Connor. One of the most bizarre and scary thoughts I have is having a person physically in my walls. When I went on a ghost tour and researched about the town of Jerome, this really just horrified me and just really is terrible. Now, there were 4 hospitals built in the town of Jerome during the period of its life and utter decay and in between. But 3 of them, obviously, they burned down, as usually every single building does in this town. But the 4th was built, and it was named the United Verde Hospital. Later was named the Jerome Grand Hotel. Now, if you want to take a tour into Jerome, this is the place you're wanting to be with tourism, and that is because simply it is the most haunted building in the entire town of Jerome, supposedly. That is because thousands of people have died in this hospital, and one of the worst things that came out of this hospital is that there was so much pileup of the bodies that were needing to be cremated that they just used the 2 smelters. The people who own the 2 smelters offered to help out the hospital, put the humans, the dead people, inside the smelters and turn them into tar, into concrete, and laid out the foundation of the streets of Jerome. That alone is one of the most terrifying things, in my opinion, is to know after the fact that I was walking on several, if not thousands, of people. They were cremated and they were mixed into concrete, asphalt, whatever that was made to put the town together. And that itself is just absolutely bizarre. That is horrifying. That is to think about, that the sidewalk you could be walking on is just made of human remains. Now, that was one of the most notable and frankly scary and bizarre and horrifying things that came out of the Jerome Grand Hotel. Besides the residents of the town, the miners did go to the hospital a lot for injuries such as being maimed, losing limbs, and several other things, burns. When they did visit the hospital, they did get shots of mercury, opioids, and different other drugs that people didn't know at the time were bad, but now we know that they are very bad, especially the mercury. And that continued with the whole wickedest town epidemic, with the whole drug problem, especially with opioids, and just people were getting sick and dying on top of all the fires and everything else that was going on. Jerome would become almost a complete ghost town in the 1950s when the mines shut down and everyone left. Obviously, when there's no jobs, people aren't really going to stick around. That's when it really settled down, but to this day, it's opened back up. The town is a whole tourist attraction that you can go and visit for yourself. The only people that are living there are the people who hold tours that count as a resident for Jerome. Alright guys, that's going to be the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you watched all the way to the end in full extent. I really appreciate it. It took a lot of hours, hard work for me to get this together. And if you guys want a part 2, just let me know in the comments below. But other than that, please like, subscribe, and upon editing the entirety of this video, I noticed a lot of parts where I got frustrated, and I compiled a little bit of clips at the end here that I just loved, that made me laugh really hard. So please enjoy them. Okay. Soon after the move that Jenny Bowders made up to Gold Road, Arizona, she did unfortunately get murdered. I'm not laughing because of that, but it hold on. I just laughed at someone's death. There was 4 hotels built. Hotels. Too much prostitution, am I right? Now, there was 4 hotels built. 3 of them obviously burned down, because that's how every building burns. Now, there was 4 hotels. Why do I keep saying hotel? Oh man, what am I doing with my life?